Today, we become legends.
There's been a lot of buzz lately around the pool of gods that have come to Smite 2 first, and whether or not they were good choices or if better ones could have been made. If you want my quick take on it, I do think a lot of the gods that have come so early are a bit of a misstep for varying reasons, like them being on the whole too simple. It's important to have simple gods, but it's also important to have some more complex ones and unique ones that aren't just circle, line, dash, bigger circle. Some of them are also just boring or old gods from Smite 1, and it would be really interesting to see a blog post or deep dive on the thought process behind why the team have chosen the gods they've chosen so far, because some are fine picks in my opinion, but I would say the majority kind of aren't. With that said though, that's not the core topic of this video, but some people have asked about it. Here's my top 10 gods I would bring to Smite 2 immediately, and my top 10 gods I would never bring to Smite 2. Which, by the way, that's a bit of a simplified version to keep the title short. What I actually mean is I would either do these gods last, or better yet, rework them substantially going into Smite 2 to fix their issues. I wouldn't axe them entirely. And of course, any gods that are already in Smite 2 or we know publicly are coming soon won't be counted, even though I do think there's a couple already there that should have made the bad list in my opinion, and a couple that we already know are coming but aren't in the game yet that definitely would have made my good list. Also, this list is of course not comprehensive, and there are more than 10 gods I would bring quickly and more than 10 gods I would not bring quickly, but these were some of the most important ones that stood out to me in both categories. But without further ado, let's jump in with my first god I would bring to Smite 2 immediately, and that's Ra. If you ask me to show someone a fundamental Smite mage kit, Ra would be it. He's simple to pick up but reasonably hard to master, has impactful and rewarding abilities to hit, and does team healing in a much healthier way than some other gods do. Ra simply embodies a lot of the core aspects of what makes a good Smite kit in my opinion, and it baffles me as to why he wasn't there on day one, and baffles me even more that we've not heard any mention of him coming yet. Moving on though, my first god for the list of ones I wouldn't bring to Smite 2 quickly is Vamana. As Smite has aged, Vamana's issues have only become more and more prevalent, those issues mainly being his base kit is incredibly boring and his ultimate is unskilled and either completely broken or absolutely useless based purely on if it got giga buffed recently to compensate for his useless and terrible base kit. This video isn't going to go into exactly how I would rework these problematic gods for Smite 2, I have a couple of videos like that up on my channel already if you want to see them, but Vamana would need significant changes when he eventually does make the transition to Smite 2 in my opinion. Next up on the good side we have Cthulhu, which is another one that completely baffles me as to why we've not heard from him yet. He was the most popular god release of all time, has a top 10 pick rate, is a huge pop culture icon outside of traditional mythology nerds, and could bring some extra recognition to the game. His kit is generally well designed and flashy for promotional material, tournaments, clips to share and go viral, etc. He would also look amazing with the technical improvements of UE5, but that is also the only reason I can think of as to why we've not heard anything about him yet for Smite 2. He is one of the more technically difficult gods to implement due to his large size, custom camera angle, insanity effect, and of course his ultimate. I'm not well versed enough in game dev to know how much longer Cthulhu would take than a quote normal god, but if he would take like 2 times longer, then I can sort of see why they would delay him in order to bump up the roster size as fast as possible. Even still, I think Cthulhu will be huge for the game and should come sooner rather than later. Moving on though, next up for the shouldn't come soon list is Shiva. If you've been around my channel for a long time, this pick might surprise you, and don't worry, there are plenty of my classic hate boner gods on here too, but Shiva is just boring. Nothing about his kit is interesting, and having him in Smite 2 would only make me angry that his slot wasn't taken by a more interesting warrior. This isn't a pick like Vamana where I think he should be reworked before being added. They can keep Shiva as he is for all the 6 Shiva mids that want him, but I do think he should be among the last to come to Smite 2, not the first. Next up for the should come immediately list is Khepri, who is not only an iconic Smite design with a generally great kit, he also fills a key gap in the roster of Smite 2 at the moment, which is supports with an almost purely defensive and peel focused playstyle. Among our current offerings, Ymir is probably the most defensive and peel focused, which really says something. This spot could also be Geb, but he is definitely less peel focused than Khepri and also less popular, so I do think the Hugbug should come first out of these two. Moving on though, next up for my naughty list is, you guessed it, or maybe you didn't if you're not completely intersect pilled, it's Freya. Arguably the single worst designed Smite 1 god there is, she's been reworked 3 different times to no success and causes way more problems than she's worth. This one does come with a caveat, and that I think if they do have the balls to give Freya a complete and total ability rework going into Smite 2, then I actually think she should come sooner rather than later, because she's a pretty popular and iconic character in mythology, and it would be a chance to showcase what the team can actually do and set a precedent that they are willing and able to do complete reworks for gods that need it going into Smite 2. Because at the moment, the absolute most we've seen is one ability being replaced or minor tweaks to a few abilities. I imagine they are holding back on full reworks at the moment though to flesh out the roster and develop other core systems. But yeah, the reason she's on the naughty list is because in the back of my mind, knowing how hesitant the team have been to do complete reworks, with the last one being Nox in season 1, I feel like they'll either leave her as is or just do another half-assed minor rework that fails, therefore she languishes in the bad section of this video. Okay, moving on though to a god that unequivocally should come soon in my opinion, and that is Thor. Much like Cthulhu, Thor would bring some much needed wide recognition and pop culture bonus points to Smite 2. I mean, he's one of the few gods that have at least at one point been the poster child of Smite, and for good reason. He's also got an excellently designed kit that feels amazing to play, and is a pure risk-taker's character that's exciting to watch, which is a bit lacking in the current roster. He gambles with his life at every turn. Sure, he can one-shot you if he catches you with no bees, but his ult is reactable if you can see it coming, and he commits his only mobility option to engage and do damage. He's also relatively low skill floor and quite high skill ceiling, which is indicative of a well-designed god. Thor should definitely come sooner rather than later for Smite 2. Alright, next up on my naughty list is Kumbhakarna, and it may be a little biased from the recent Smite 1 changes, but I feel like literally no one except Kumbha has any fun when he's in the game. He's toxic to play against, can screw over his own teammates or be screwed over by his own teammates way too easily. His pick rate was extremely low until recently, which shows people are only playing him now because he's broken and not because they actually enjoy the character. This guy can suck a fart for all I care and should definitely be one of the last gods they add to Smite 2 unless he's getting a substantial rework. Next up though for the nice list we have Hercules, who I think similar to Ra and Thor, who are iconic quintessential mage and assassin designs, Hercules is an iconic quintessential warrior design, and he absolutely should have been one of the initial warriors instead of Odin or Bellona in my opinion. He's always relatively popular even when he's not meta, and is just a fun god to play. I might be a little bit biased here, but again, his pick rate agrees with me on this one. Can he be a little bit toxic to play against at times? Sure. But I don't think he has anywhere near the levels of design issues that some of the naughty list gods have, and he's an iconic Smite 1 design that would actually make me want to play solo lane in Smite 2, because right now the offerings there are abysmal outside of Mordred. Alright, next up for the gods that shouldn't come soon, we have Bakasura. This guy has always been a bit of a problem in Smite 1 due to his extreme feast or famine playstyle, leading him to often be completely useless or completely broken based on small buffs, nerfs, or meta shifts. He would be an even bigger problem in Smite 2 at the moment due to the invade meta, and would not be a healthy addition to the game in its current state. I don't really know how you solve this guy, and maybe you just don't, but if they aren't planning to rework Baka, then I hope he comes towards the end of the roster. There are so many more exciting, fair, and skill-testing junglers that should come ahead of Pup Stompasura for Smite 2. Alright, next up for those who should, we have Janus. As one of the most unique mages out there in terms of playstyle, Janus would fill the huge gap that currently exists in mid for Smite 2 in terms of fun gods to play there. I also feel he would interact with the new systems really well, especially with some of the active items like Staff of Myrddin that could allow him to aggressively use one portal and still have it up for a follow-up or disengage. Janus can be a bit toxic to play against, especially when played by a great player, and him having access to Gem of Focus without it even being his starter item is scary as heck, but he's just fundamentally one of the most fun mid laners, which is what the role needs right now in Smite 2. And it would be awesome to see Janus available for the Vegas LAN in January. He's also just a very popular god in general, despite having an extremely low win rate, which really shows people do just enjoy playing him. Okay, next up on the naughty list is Bake Kujira, who I think most would agree does not need to come to Smite 2 anytime soon. Could he maybe feel a little better with the new systems? Possibly, but this god is just so unfun to play against and not even fun to play in my opinion. He's just a complete sleeper design that should come in the very last few gods for Smite 2, purely on the fact that there's like 100 other gods I would add before adding the whale. Alright, moving on though, next up is Poseidon for the nice list, which is just another actually fun mage that baffles me why he's not in yet. He's extremely popular regardless of meta relevance, has some unique gameplay elements compared to a lot of the more generic burst mages, and would fill out the mid-mage roster really nicely in my opinion. He would even have potential for some funny strength-based auto-attack or crit builds in the new Smite 2 system, which would be a lot of fun to experiment with as well. As I said, it baffles me that Poseidon isn't already in the game. Next up for the naughty list though is Kali. Now hear me out, I know Kali represents an auto-attack jungler which we currently don't have in Smite 2, but I think there are much better options for that, like Nemesis, Mercury, or even Arachne with some kit tweaks. Hell, even put Erlangshed in there and just embrace him being a jungler and don't try and force him into the solo lane. Kali is just an extremely polarizing god that is either broken or garbage based on small tweaks to her numbers, and while balance isn't the most important concern for Smite 2 right now in the alpha phase, it is still relevant, and Kali is simply extremely unfun to play against unless you're a very high level player and or playing in a large party so you have the coordination to shut her down. In the vast majority of random ranked and casual games, she just left click W's through the whole team once she gets late game with no brain required, and while she can be fun to play as, I myself have I've played her a lot in Smite 1, I don't think that's worth the hassle she causes for the other 9 players in the match, and I would either leave her until later when she can be implemented in a more concrete game state that's more balanced, or I would rework her. Okay, next up for the gods that should come soon, we have Medusa. This is another one that's got the added bonus of being very well known in pop culture that could bring some attention to the game, but she's also just a well-designed hunter that could also fill the role of a strength-based ability hunter that Smite 2 currently doesn't have. I think she's the best option for that role, but I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to Ula taking that spot either. I just would prefer Medusa personally, and she's more popular, so she's probably the better choice to bring earlier. Okay, take this next naughty list pick with a grain of salt. Persephone, as is from Smite 1, I think should not come to the game anytime soon. However, much like a few others on this list, I think if Hi-Rez are going to commit to major reworks, Persephone could be brought back sooner rather than later as a showcase for the new systems and mechanics of Smite 2, and to show the team's willingness and aptitude towards large reworks. There's so much more that could be done with the idea of farming-based characters, and the interact mechanic could even be used there to give some sort of control over it somehow. The passive would need to be completely rethought, and ideally the ult as well, but if they were to commit to a large rework, I wouldn't hate her coming sooner. But if she is going to remain mostly or entirely the same as her Smite 1 iteration, she should be left for later due to her toxic playstyle and small player base. Next up for the should come category is one that might cause a bit of a stir, and that is Izanami. I had to work hard to remove my bias here, as I personally hate Izanami due to how free she wins lane just by virtue of existing. But I do think it's important to have a super easy god available in every role, and given Neith isn't your traditional hunter even in Smite 1 and less so in Smite 2, the other ADC offerings right now in Anhur and Cernunnos aren't particularly easy to pick up, so I think Izanami could fill that slot for the new or less experienced players coming into the ADC role. She's also just extremely popular, which is likely one of the most important metrics Hi-Rez look at in terms of which gods to add first. You'd much rather add a god with an 11% pick rate than a god with a 2% pick rate, all other factors equal. For those reasons, I think Izanami is actually a good choice to come soon. From a god I hate that I do actually think should come soon to a god I hate that I think definitely shouldn't, next up for the naughty list is Nox, which is another god I think needs reworking before she should come to Smite 2, and if that's not going to happen, then she should be one of the last additions made. I've ranted ad nauseum about the issues with Nox on my channel before, so I won't go into too much detail here, but of course, it's the fact that she's so entirely reliant on hitting 2 abilities that basically function as 1 ability. If you get hit by this without beads, which will be way more common in Smite 2, of course, you just die, and if Nox misses the combo, she is essentially useless and dies herself, because that's all she does, really. Definitely one that either needs reworking, tweaking to make her a support, or just arriving later in the roster. Moving on though, my final god that definitely should come soon for the video is another one that will be quite a shock if you've viewed my channel for a long time, and that's actually Aphrodite. Stay with me on this one. There needs to be a core healer added soon in my opinion, and of course I think Ra should be there, but his healing is really a secondary trait compared to his raw burst damage. I think adding a true dedicated healer to the game sooner rather than later is important, not only for the people that enjoy that playstyle, but also to build out the systems and items that cater to that playstyle in order to make adding future healers or just healing abilities much more smooth. I think Aphro is a better option than Hel, as her healing is a bit more manageable and they can balance out healing abilities and systems based on Aphro, rather than adding Hel, who has historically been the worst offender of degenerate healing strategies in Smite 1. Also, Aphro is just way more popular than Hel regardless of meta, so there's that too. Personally, I think what they should do with Aphro is what they've been trying to do in Smite 1 for a while, and that's just trying to make her an outright support. You could still allow her to be viable in mid with the damage build, but I think she's much less frustrating in general when she's played from the support role, and the idea of having some healing and utility-based supports rather than just big tanks with CC is interesting. So yeah, you actually just heard me argue for Aphrodite being added ahead of some of my personal favorites like Erlang Shen, Tyr, Achilles, Awilix, Raven, and more. Hopefully that was enjoyable for you. And finally, before we get to my last naughty pick for the video, a few honorable mentions for both sides. Agni, Mulan, Merlin, Surtur, Cerberus, Scylla, Wukong, and Rama for the good side, and Hera, Hel, Chernobog, and Artio for the bad side. Alright, my final dishonorable pick for the video is going to finish off strong with farming hate comments, and that's Skadi. There is a caveat here. Much like a lot of these on this list, if Hi-Rez had the balls to commit to a major rework of this character, then she can absolutely come sooner, as she occupies a similar space to Persephone in my mind, in that there is so much more that can be done with the idea of this design based around a permanent pet that is just not being done currently with Skadi. It's a tough one with her though, because unlike some of the other rework candidates like Nox, Persephone, or Vamana, Skadi is actually quite popular and loved by her dedicated player base, so any kind of rework would have to toe a fine line between doing enough to solve the inherent problems and frustration points of fighting her, but not doing so much or doing it so badly to the point that her original mains don't like the character design anymore. This video isn't about what exactly I would do to rework these gods, and I do have some of those videos up already that cover that stuff, but I do think Skadi needs some change change if she is going to come to Smite 2 soon. But that's it for my 10 gods I would bring immediately and 10 gods I would either bring last or rework significantly going into Smite 2. What are your thoughts? I'm sure I pissed off at least 90% of the people watching in some way, be that by saying your main needs a rework, saying your main is boring, not mentioning your main at all, whatever. So do let me know your own thoughts down below, and I'll catch you guys for another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.